And of course, as you all know, we are in the middle of a extremely volatile crossroads where the empire is at war with this government. Today, I was visiting the foreign minister of Yemen, a wonderful guy, former journalist, super cool. And he was super cool knowing that his government is a target. If the Americans decide, they can bomb the seat of government here. They can even bomb the foreign office in. It's fascinating because at the entrance of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it's even written in English. This is old. This is probably from, I would say, from the late 50s or early 60s in golden letters. It's written in English, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, apart from for Arabic, right? So this is an extremely volatile place to be here now, and it's amazing because we are a very small group of foreigners. Two of my favorites are a researcher from Malaysia who made a presentation earlier this week with Yemeni scholars around him about the militarization of archaeology in Palestine. And he was explaining how the Zionists are erasing cultural traces of all sorts around Al-Aqsa, especially. Basically, they want to erase Al-Aqsa from the official historical record of Palestine. And a Malaysian guy from a university in northern Malaysia, very unassuming, but the guy is a killer. And his presentation, people were like, wow. And many of them don't know this data, you know. And another one is Professor Ma, which is a Hui Muslim, a Chinese Muslim. I met many Huis when I traveled the Silk Road in the 90s, yes. And Professor Ma, he's from Ningxia province, north of China. And he runs a Center of Middle Eastern Studies in Huanzhou. So we talked a lot, obviously, about Islam in China, about China nowadays. He's a wonderful guy, you know. So we have people of an extremely high level, and people that Jackson Hinkle from the US, for instance, very young. I can't believe that when I was his age, I couldn't even dream of visiting Yemen, you know, invited. But the guy's 25 and he's here, and he spends the whole day like, wow, I can barely believe this is definitely not California. So, and we are learning all the time, and they are very patient. They mobilize the resources of the government to welcome us. Just to give you an idea, Nima, can you believe it? We arrived at the airport. There was a parade welcoming us at 2 a.m. on the tarmac with a black SUV convoy. It's a completely crazy thing, which takes us everywhere. Everywhere we go is the black SUV convoy with the sirens, with the armed commandos in the back and the whole thing. It's absolutely mind-boggling considering we are a group of scholars, academic, journalists, analysts, etc. But they value tremendously something that one of them actually said to us directly. You have broken the blockade against Yemen. And it's true because we are the first Eastern-Western group. There are people from the East, of course, but mostly Westerns that visits Sana'a in a long time. So obviously, just to give you an example, and this is to lighten up our conversation. I went for a walk in the morning by myself, which is what I do all over the planet. But here, under the circumstances and the fact that they are being bombed every day by CENTCOM, they freaked out completely. There was a guy following me. He was on the phone all the time. I was walking. I was going towards the old city, etc. Soon, a black SUV shows up with people armed to their teeth, where they politely took back to the hotel because they need a special approval to have one foreigner walking the streets of Sana'a in the morning. Wow, no, you cannot do that. So you understand why they are very, very itchy, because they know that us being here and them being a target, we could also become a target by extension, right? The Americans could bomb our hotel if they wanted. They are too coward for that. And I think many of you may have seen a video that I posted online, and it was picked up by Geopolitics Live. We visited yesterday the site of a civilian building, a two-story civilian building that was bombed to smithereens by the Americans the day before. There was no weapons depot in this. I talked to the owner of the building, and he said, no, we were trying to, there were not many tenants. There were like maybe 6 or so, because everybody left because we were planning to refurbish the building. So the building was relatively empty. But there were victims inside the building and people in the streets as well. And the site, if you look at the video, you look at the site, is a Gaza site. It's totally, the building was completely destroyed. And so there will be more. And for instance, and obviously, people who live in Sana, their historical memory, even if it doesn't go back to the 18th or the 19th century, or to 3,000 years before Christ, where this was already a booming civilization. That's, where else in the world can you have that, But if they go back to the 2010s, they took us to a site that it was a communal center that suffered a two-tap bombing by the so-called coalition at the time, basically led by the Saudis. The UAE was also part of the coalition, and guess who was backing the coalition, leading from behind? The Americans. They launched, we can see the two enormous craters, and obviously the building completely destroyed. They killed, in this two-tap, over 1,000 civilians and injured over 2,000 civilians. This was 8 years ago only. So for them, it's in the collective memory, and the place is as it was in 2017. So they can show, not only for the locals to remember, they can show the foreign visitors, look, we have been under siege, under blockade, and under bombing like since forever. So when you put all this in perspective, it's very, very serious, Nima, and it touches you. All of us, there are very, very emotional moments when we, for instance, we are discussing with a super high-level guy from the political council, for instance, and he's talking about spirituality, moral values, why they adopted this decision to defend their brothers, which they insist all the time, in Palestine. They will not back down. They are not intimidated by the empire. So you look at them and said, wow. You have to marvel at that, because they are today, for the whole planet, I would say, at the vanguard of resistance and all forms of resistance. And they instill fear in the Americans. This absolutely stupid so-called leak, which was not a leak, of those clowns discussing, okay, we need to send a message, let's bomb Yemen because we can, Okay, it's a bloody bunch of clowns who don't know anything about these people, these warriors, this civilization, the richness of the history of Yemen, which is the real Arabia. Here is southern Arabia. Here is what the Roman Empire used to call Arabia Felix, happy Arabia. And it was supposed to always be happy Arabia because they have everything here. Among other things, because of this. The best coffee on the planet. And we went twice to this very large coffee producer here, Haraz, extremely professional. And they show us all the varieties of coffee that they have, stuff that we never even heard. about. And of course, we tasted some of them, but it's absolutely unbelievable. And everybody knows I am a coffee fanatic. Nah? My podcast to Brazil is called Pepe Café. Yes, cafe, because I drink coffee all over the planet. But drink, yeah, right, Nima. But to drink Yemeni coffee, you go to another level. It's like you are tripping on LSD without the acid, with coffee.
É muito interessante você falando de Yemen, and we don't know anything about Yemen. It seems to me something unbelievable. How do they feel, Pepe, about the way that the Trump administration is attacking them and believing their attack is something different from the Biden administration's one?
It's not, Nima, exactly. Of course, this was one of the first questions that we all had, and their answers are in an Arabic way, as much as I can distinguish with my minimalistic Arabic, metaphorical, very measured. They are not aggressive at all. They said, yes, we didn't expect any change. We had previous administrations that were bombing us, saying that they were not, that they were part of a so-called coalition, which they were supporting from the beginning with weapons. So the bombs that were launched against us in the 2010s, and until there was an armistice between Saudi Arabia and Yemen, they were American bombs, of course, launched by American planes. So they have no illusions. So in this aspect, there are some similarities with some deep Russian thinkers. No illusions about the empire, right? But at the same time, they put everything under the context of the genocide in Palestine. For instance, we are here essentially as part of a conference on Palestine, which started on Saturday morning and ended a few hours ago, 4 days. We were part of it basically for 2 days. And these other 2 days, we had a lot of Yemeni analysts and scholars and all that they were debating the whole Palestine drama, the genocide put in context, the axis of resistance, and they're going to elaborate a set of conclusions. And we're going to receive these conclusions in Arabic and English after a few days. And then we can start talking about it in detail. But they take it extremely seriously, and they have people who study this extremely seriously. And they are very well informed, Nima. For instance, when that story of the so-called signal leak broke, 10 minutes later, everybody here already knew. The diplomats, the security people, the intelligence services, the people who are taking care of us, everybody already knew about it. So they're very well informed. You cannot fool them. And they follow closely everything that happens in Washington, because now they are a target. So the target, this whole government, which is expanding to North Yemen, and then all the way to, let's say, maybe 50 kilometers with the Saudi border, and then extending to the west all the way to the Red Sea, which is it's very complicated because we have been lobbying from the beginning to go to Hodeidah. It's an extremely risky security operation, so maybe it will not be possible. They say they are trying. They are worried about our security. Of course, they are worried about the security of not only of foreigners, but themselves, and the fact that CENTCOM, one of their obsessions for the moment, I would say, is to destroy the port of Hodeidah. Probably completely, so this is an extremely serious geopolitical, geoeconomic issue. And Hodeidah for them is absolutely essential for their exports and imports who cross the Bab al-Mandeb and go across the Red Sea, and they come to Hodeidah. And don't forget that Yemenis are a trading people since time immemorial. Do you know how Islam arrived in Southeast Asia? By Yemenis, by sea. So it's everything. So the people from Malaysia and Indonesia, for instance, including our friend, these Malaysian researchers, they know very, very well the cultural, religious, and moral importance of Yemen as one of the propagators of Islam around the world, and especially thanks to Yemen, Islam arrived in Southeast Asia, not overland, but by a maritime Silk Road, to quote our Chinese friends. You know, I discussed this with Professor Ma, and obviously this is one of the things that he teaches at his Center of Middle East Studies in China. But coming back to your question, they frame conceptually perfectly well that that they knew from the beginning that the backlash would be a bomb, as it is, because and with acts they are defending the people of Gaza with acts, unlike a good deal of the axis of resistance, and if we expand to the Arab world, against the thundering silence or cowardice or both of the Arab world, the Arab League, the Organization of the Islamic States, everybody. So when, for instance, we had yesterday a fabulous discussion, and each of us could pose a detailed question to him, to the former Prime Minister, Professor Bin Habtour, who is now, let's say, the supervisor of. So he came to our hotel, he stayed with us for over 2 hours, he answered all the questions in detail. It was absolutely fascinating. But he was making a point all the time. This is, let's say, a mix of a political decision, because this is a decision that comes from, I think before I start talking, I have to explain to you, Nima, to all of you, how does the government work here in Yemen? It's like a triangle like this. At the top of the triangle, you have the spiritual guidance of Syed Abdul Malik al-Houthi, which we can say is the leader of Yemen. Then on the other two points of the triangle, we have the Supreme Political Council, and we have the government here in Sana'a, including, of course, the Ministry of Foreign Relations that we visit today. So this is the triangle. And obviously the decisions, it's not that you have unilateral decisions by the supreme leader, let's put it this way. The political council adapts the religious, moral, and spiritual vision of the leader to geopolitics and to military matters. And like that, we arrive at how the government works. Fascinating. For instance, 2 days ago, something that it hit us like literally, you know. We were in a divania, a room here where you can relax, Islamic style, cushions, you know, drink tea, etc. And we were waiting for the nightly speech of Abdul Malik al-Houthi, which is something that they watch every night. It's usually a spiritual speech with lots of quotations from the Quran, etc. Guess who shows up in our room unannounced? None other than Yahya Saree, the military spokesman of Ansar Allah. So many of us, you can see the pictures of many of us on the net, on Telegram, etc. And we were all like, wow, because we understand what it means for him to travel from where he was to come to our hotel, which is the best known hotel in town. It's an enormous security risk. He is the #1 target of the Americans and the bloody Zionists now, because he is the face of Ansar Allah to the whole world. Every day he is reading his briefing, his Ansar Allah briefing, military briefing. Everybody knows him all over the world. Professor Matt told me that he is a celebrity in China, Nima. Can you believe it? Everybody, especially the young generation, they think that Yahya Saree is bigger than Mick Jagger. It's absolutely extraordinary. So he comes here, very humble. He looks very young. He doesn't look 50 years old. He looks like he's less than 30. You know, composure, absolutely extraordinary, shakes hands with everybody, speaks very, I would say he spoke for less than 10 minutes, you know, very concise, very straight to the point, explaining to all of us the position of Ansar Allah vis-a-vis the fact that the genocide continues and Israel broke the ceasefire. Explaining what we are listening every day coming from Ansar Allah. It will continue unless they stop the famine that they are provoking in Gaza, the slow motion extermination of Gaza, and they're not even talking about a final political solution for Palestine. Stop the genocide, essentially. So obviously they will continue. And they go straight to the point. We are not going to back down. So you listen, basically the same thing from Yahya Sari, which is a military spokesman of Ansar Allah, and the former Prime Minister, Professor Bin Haftur. So the message, politically, religiously, morally, it's the same message, and it's extremely strong. And you cannot find a hole to puncture the way they think. They totally believe in what they are doing in terms of the morally correct position. Try to explain this, Nima, to MBS or MBZ in the bloody Emirates or Saudi Arabia. They don't even know what morality is, these people, the so-called leaders of the Arab world, you know. And no wonder they are hated by both. And no wonder they are still, the Saudis would like to destroy Yemen or control everything in Yemen. Same with the Emirates. And it's very complicated because the Emirates, for instance, the island of Socotra here, south of, in the Red Sea, near the Bab al-Mandeb. The Emirates practically took over Socotra. They are colonizing Socotra in a way that's going to be very hard for Yemen to recover it. And the Saudis, of course, they support a puppet government which sits in Aden, the port in the south, but basically is in a five-star hotel in Riyadh. And obviously nobody takes this government seriously, but it's the government that is supported and recognized by the Americans and the Europeans. So the country is divided. For instance, I could not get a detailed answer on how do they see the fact that the country is divided at least in 3 different Yemens. The bulk of Yemen, which is Sana'a, Sada Governorate, Hodeida Port in the Red Sea, etc. And it's most of the industrial commercial activity. This Aden, which they say Aden today is so boring. Nothing happens over there. People are afraid. They continue with their business, but nobody believes or trusts this puppet government controlled by the Saudis, of course. And then there's the Hadramaut region, expanding towards the desert to the east, which is enormous. It's where the Bin Laden clan comes from. A people of navigators and explorers and traders all over the planet. And this is, they explained to me, they gave the best explanation, in fact, that this is practically an autonomous region. It's the local tribes and clans and, let's say, provincial governments that control and run the Hadramaut as a whole. So it doesn't respond to Sana'a here. It doesn't respond to Aden, the puppet government. It's practically self-sufficient. So it is a country divided. So it's very, very complicated. And for this Aden regime, puppet regime to collapse is going to be very complicated, extra complications, because it means that the Saudis and the Americans and everybody else, the international financial system, whatever you want to call it, they will let it go. They won't. So here in Sana'a, they know that they offer to the world the real face of Yemen, which is based in Islam and which is based in a very ancient, sophisticated culture, and their moral rectitude. That explains why Ansar Allah and the government Sana, especially by the young generations all over the world, with so much respect. And how they managed to conquer without a PR operation. There is a language problem, which is essential. For instance, Lebanon and Palestine were former colonial possessions. So you have a lot of English speakers who even know how the international media landscape works. So they can at least broadcast their message in English to the whole planet. Palestinians, Lebanese. Here, everybody speaks Arabic. Very, very few speak English, and they don't know how it works. Now they are discovering how social media works, and they are very, very powerful on social media. Even if it's only in Arabic, you get instant translation in several languages. And that explains why Ansar Allah and Yahya Sari now is a worldwide figure. And they don't need any of this aggressively. For instance, their position defending the Palestinians, defending the end of Gaza was a response to the genocide, but a response based on physical acts and an actual blockade of Israeli ships or Western ships going to Israel. So, and this is not going to change, Nima. They can bomb the whole of Yemen to ashes, whatever they want to do, those incapable imbeciles, which are now terrified that still Ansar Allah and the Yemeni armed forces, they control the Red Sea. This has not changed. And it's going to be very hard for the Americans to turn this around unless they eliminate all the, by the way, what they're bombing, they have no bloody clue of what they're bombing because they don't have local intel here. CIA, MI6, all these clowns, they don't. So they bomb civilian buildings like they did 2 weeks ago, or they bomb installations around the Hodeida port, and this will continue. Unfortunately, this will continue. But all this to give you the broader picture of how strong their message and their attitude is, and why they are doing this to defend Palestine, which can be instantly recognized from Bolivia to Indonesia. We have, for instance, fantastic. He works very close to Evo Fernando. Fernando is a wonderful guy. He made a speech today, absolutely extraordinary, and coming from a BRICS partner, very, very important. He's saying that we have to start promoting an intercontinental global South alliance to start our own models and stop depending from the global North models, geopolitical and geoeconomic. Brilliant. They loved it here because they understood perfectly that the struggle all across Latin America and the struggle in West Asia is basically the same. And historically, since the beginning of decolonization, has been the same and continues to be the same. So it's great to see this here as well. They pay a lot of attention to what us foreigners are saying. They answer our observations as well. As much as we are immensely more interested in what they have to say. And every time that we meet a high-ranking diplomat, a high-ranking member of the political council, or like Yahya Sari, a high-ranking military member, and it's disarming how natural they look, and at the same time you can feel their spiritual strengths and their moral character. It's fascinating, Nima, because this is disappearing fast all over the world.
how do they feel about Iran and the way that the United States is saying that they're Iran's proxy in this fight? Do they? How did you find it? How do they feel about Iran? How do they feel about the way that the West is picturing them as a tool used by Iranians?
Exactly. They understand perfectly that as much as they are allied with Iran and as much as they have several important interactions with Iran, they created their own. Well, geoeconomically, they have to survive, which is very, very difficult, which is a mix of, for instance, how they combat the famine inside the country, how they develop help for poor people, and militarily, what they learned not only from Iran. For instance, Professor Bin Haptour was saying that the best Yemeni engineers and physicists, for instance, where did they study? USSR and China. So obviously, this pays dividends, for decades. He was talking, for instance, by what they learned from the military during the time of Nasser. So people here not only they have a long memory, but they study hard, and what they learn, they pass to the new generations. And of course, what they learn about modern military infrastructure, methods, and weaponry, etc., that they learn from Iran, they develop their own. Which it's fascinating because this is the sign of a sophisticated civilization. They are willing to, like China, they are willing to learn, pick up the best from people who are their sources or are willing to help, and then they develop their own system. But they don't speak explicitly about Iran. The people we spoke to, which are high level, political council, government, diplomats, etc., they talk about what Yemen is doing and how Yemen has to fight its own fight to, I wouldn't say benefit, but to at least alleviate the plight of the Palestinians. This was the driving force behind this conference. The conference is centered on Palestine. It's not centered on the axis of resistance as a whole. But every time we're talking to them, many of us, we say right away, you are at the vanguard of the axis of resistance. And they don't even have to recognize that because it's a fact. But for instance, they are always paying extreme respect to the memory of General Soleimani. They pay enormous respect to the work of Sheikh Nasrallah. There are posters of Nasrallah everywhere around Sana'a. One of them, like a 10-minute walk from where I am, for instance. But they understand that the axis of resistance, with them having a central role, will have to keep rejuvenating itself. So, once again, to use a Chinese terminology, And this is very interesting, Nima. I asked one of these guys who is a top member of the political council. Only one question. Can you tell me if you have special channels of communication with both Russia and China? I haven't written my column yet, but I'm telling you and our audience more or less what he said without saying it. Once again, he gave a beautiful, flowery, metaphorical explanation in Arabic, basically saying, of course they do. Fascinating. So the big BRICS powers, they have their channels directly with the government here. That doesn't mean that they are influencing what Sana'a is doing. But they talk about the Red Sea. They talk about blockade. They talk about military matters, etc. They talk about what kind of diplomatic help the Yemenis can get across the global south, which is something that they don't need because they made their own global south club or people who, Yemen is at the forefront, at the vanguard of resistance by themselves. They don't need help from anybody else. So we are always with all these conversations, and then looking at the larger picture. It's a pity we haven't had the opportunity to travel because of the war. They are afraid that if we go out on a convoy that we could become a target, and they are absolutely right. But I'm sure if we have the chance to travel before we leave, I'm going to stay here until the weekend, for instance. And then we're going to have an even bigger picture, understanding the bigger picture in terms of other parts of Yemen.
The way that they're responding to the attacks on the part of the United States, how do they report on that? What do they say about it that we don't hear it from the mainstream media or the way that we are receiving the information? Is that something else that they're reporting in Yemen that we are not receiving it here?
No. What we get from those daily briefings by Yahya Sari, it's let's say these are the raw facts. For instance, they don't explain if they launch a missile against the USS Truman, for instance. They say the targets were reached and all that. They don't give details. These are military matters, of course. And don't forget that the Americans also don't talk about it. So it's open to interpretation. What happened to this missile or this battery of missiles and drones launched against the USS Truman? Nobody knows. First of all, because the Americans will never admit a hit, two hits, several hits, etc. And here, they prefer to be, I would say in a sort of metaphorical vein, saying, our operation was successful, and interpret it the way you want. And when you look at the facts, we see that the Americans are absolutely terrified to have aircraft carriers in the Red Sea because they are targets, right? And when it comes to the missiles launched against Ben Gurion Airport, and the fact that the Houthis by themselves had the balls to do what the whole bloody planet could do and didn't, they installed an aerial blockade against Ben Gurion Airport. Just like that. It's amazing because they can. They have hypersonic missiles and they can hit the airport with hypersonic missiles. So this in itself is something absolutely mind-blowing, isn't it? So they don't need to advertise that they are very good, they are very capable militarily. They don't need to. The facts will prove by themselves. And the fact that now Israel is like a bunch of cockroaches, they are really terrified about the firepower of the Yemeni armed forces. And the Americans, the same thing. This whole stupid signal, leak or not leak, it was not a leak. This mega imbecile from the Atlantic, he leaked it by himself. He had access to it, and people provided him the access. And they are backdoors to signal. Technically, they are not. Many friends of mine who are very well versed in the matter say there are no backdoors. There are. And these backdoors are CIA and MI6. So this could have come from MI6 backdoor because for their own interests and their own agenda. And obviously to go after the Trump administration. If that dialogue, those dialogues that were reproduced, if they are really true, it's a clown show. Vance, Hegseth, and Waltz talking together on Signal about how to hit Yemen. It doesn't even qualify as a clown show. It's pathetic. Pathetic. Assuming all that is true. Obviously, everybody went on denial mode, etc. So we will never know if it's true or not. But if this clown show continues like this, and they think that they can bomb Yemen because they can, to send a message, according to Vance, if I'm not mistaken, they will be in for a very rude awakening. It would suffice for them to have somebody, give him a decent essay on Yemen's struggle and fight against invaders, bombers, or whatever, so they have an idea who they are up to. It's a nation of warriors, and wow, they have no idea what's going to hit them. So this is where we have Nima, a bunch of almost certified clowns launching a war on an app because they want to, because they need to send a message.
If we assume that, do they really think that the United States is trying to intimidate them, or how do you find the limitations on their part? Are they ready to fight till the end with the United States?
Of course, Nima. They don't care. When you have a position that is expressed with such moral clarity and such precise purpose, like they do, and it's all integrated here in the government, from the spiritual leader to the political council to the structure of government here in Sana. They know exactly what they're doing, and they don't care. That they know that the backlash is going to be monstrous. It has already started. The United States of America is at war with Yemen. There's no question about that. But for them, okay, we were bombed by a coalition almost every day for what, if I'm not mistaken, 7 years or so. In the end, the bloody Saudis were like this, like rats. They say, could you please sign an armistice? You cannot intimidate him. You cannot intimidate him, Dima. And this is something for all of us decadent hedonist Westerners. Or we learn a lot about the superpower of the West, the great feats of Western civilization. You compare people, and this is a powerful experience to experience this live, to talk to them, to understand how they think, even once again with the language barrier. It's something that is priceless. And at the same time, my personal conclusion as well, it's impossible to explain this to the West. Absolutely impossible. For instance, the Chinese understand that. Civilizations in Asia who were part of the decolonization process in the second part of the 20th century, they understand that. The Americans, the NATO-stunned space, the European Union, the West as a whole, the fragmented the former collective West, now fragmented, there's no chance in hell they will ever understand that. I'm talking about the political elites. We have already a lot of young people all across the West who totally understand what Yemen is doing, instinctively, viscerally, naturally. But the elites, no. And considering the degree of corruption, and especially now the degree of panic, considering that all their projects, starting with Project Ukraine, are vanishing, it's impossible to explain the clarity, the moral rectitude, the seriousness of these people. And I would say possibly the most important element, the selfishness. It's not because they're going to gain something out of it, monetary gain or whatever. It's not selfish. It's not individualism. It's not cowboy diplomacy. They do this because they feel the need to help people who, like them, these past few years, have been bombed, have been attacked, harassed. And of course, there was not a genocide here. There was a famine provoked by the war. But in the case of Palestine, a genocide. Because morally and religiously, them to adopt this position. This is very, very serious. And we heard this even from Yahya Saree himself. Yahya Saree is a top military guy. And he thinks exactly like that. He understands the spiritual, cultural dimension of the whole thing. It's simple, Nima. I think the number one lesson for all of us who we had the privilege to visit Yemen at this crossroads is this, it's impossible to explain their character, their spiritual strength, and their vision to absolutely decadent former collective West. This is the number one lesson. And it's great to learn this here. You can only learn this if you come here and if you talk to them.
Pepe, before wrapping up this session,
yes,
the new intelligence report today came out that Tulsi Gabbard and her team is talking about that Iran is not preparing or is not looking after nuclear weapons.
Well, everybody, we knew that. You knew that, right, Nima?
Actually, Bill Burns, before leaving Washington, reported on that. Do you think the situation, how do you find the situation between Iran and the United States right now? On one side, you see that the Trump administration is trying to somehow manipulate the situation and put in pressure, as we talk about in the fighting with the Yemenis, and the way that putting a lot of sanctions, a lot of political pressure on the Iranian government. On the other hand, we had the foreign minister of Iran 2 days ago said that under pressure, we are not going to negotiate with you.
Exactly.
If you go in that direction. And how do you see these interactions between the two parties?
I think I'll have a much better grasp of all that. I plan to go to Iran in early May, Nima. I hope you will be there as well. It's absolutely essential if you are a geopolitical analyst, to go to Iran now, in the next few weeks, etc., to see by ourselves and talk to key actors. Once again, their overall broader vision. They have absolutely no illusions about whatever administration is in power in DC. But they know that they have Russia and China. They got Iran's back, but to a certain limit, of course. And we still don't know where's that limit. If this limit is an all-out war, for instance, will Russia and China have Iran's back? Totally. We don't know. We don't know. Even with their strategic partnerships, Iran has strategic partnerships with both, but they are more geoeconomic than geopolitical, and militarily to a certain extent, especially with Russia. So this is essential. And Iran is very steadfast in its position, which is a principled position. We have the right to have a civilian nuclear program, and we're not going to abandon, period. And we are not looking to build a nuclear weapon. This has been the same position since forever, right? It's not going to change. But obviously, how do you explain this to a bunch of warmongers controlled by the Zionists? You can't. Because first of all, you would be discussing a very sensitive matter with a bunch of fanatics. So we have this mix of maximum pressure 2.0, which is what Trump 2.0 is doing. These, I would say, half-hearted attempts to have a dialogue. Example, the famous letter that Trump sent to Tehran, which the Iranians are still analyzing, and there's going to be a very sophisticated response to that letter. This is not something that you respond with a yes or no or 3 or 4 lines. No, the Iranians are studying it carefully, and they're going to have a very sophisticated response. And of course, threats. This is what the empire always does. We haven't reached the point of, in the case here in Yemen, actual strikes. But this is very, very serious because everybody around Trump, everybody that has a certain position, is a Zionist or bought by Zionists. So that's very, very complicated. And Trump obviously listens to these people, even if maybe they don't even are capable to form his opinion on something, but he has to consult with these people. And the level is very, very low. I would say that in many aspects it reaches the clownish level of the Sigma non-leak. So that's very complicated, right, Nima? Because he's surrounded by a bunch of... it's very, very complicated. And obviously, because Trump is not a strategist, he doesn't understand. Okay, being diplomatic. About geopolitics, he is that transactional thing, but it is, there's no win-win for him. Is win-lose, and I win, you lose. So it's absolute. And when it comes to the JCPOA, which he destroyed, how the Iranians can possibly believe that they can do a JCPOA 2.0 with a guy who destroyed the first one? It doesn't make sense. So the Americans will have to offer something, I would say, on an adult level to Tehran. For the moment, zero. And I don't see it coming anytime soon.